You share the disclosure forms because or the addendums. All right, let's get started. How are we all doing today? Good, 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 good. Are you warm? Are you warm? Any questions before we get started? Any questions that pertains to real estate? No questions, no situations, no problems, no issues. Good to go, right? All right. We said we were going to talk about mediation today, and that's where we're going to start. And after we go through mediation, we're going to go through some addendums to the agreement of sale that we're seeing more of, and we're going to talk about them, the good one to use, the good ones not to use, and so we'll get all that accomplished. So I just gave you page 13 of the agreement of sale because that has the mediation, paragraph 27, mediation paragraph on it. The paragraph above it is paragraph 26. And just to bring to your attention again, for those that may be new or newer, is paragraph 26C is a very important paragraph. And there's a blank on there. It says that a buyer and seller agree that if there is a dispute over entitlement to deposit monies that is unresolved within blank days, 180 is in parens, 180. I highly recommend that you do not leave that blank. I would put in either 30 or 45 days and not 180. Several years ago, PAR backed that off. It was 365 and they backed it off to 180. Now 180 is still a long time because what can happen is if there's a dispute, whether it's right or wrong, the dispute, if we do not get both parties to sign off on the release, we can't release that deposit, and the buyer can be held up because maybe their down money, all their down money is in the deposit. So they can't move on to another house without having that back and having it resolved. So we recommend 30 or 60 days. I highly recommend if you have a listing and you get an offer on it, you want to review that number that's in there, because I'm seeing agents put in 5 days and 7 days. Mm-hmm. And if you get an offer that says 5 days or 7 days, I want you to counter offer that with 30 or 45 days. And the reason being is if you put 5 days in there, which I've had, the 5 days in there, you might as well not take a deposit, period. Because what happens after that 5 days, the buyer sends me a letter requesting for the deposit money. And if there has been no mediation or any litigation started, I've got to return that deposit monies. Whether the seller thinks that they deserve it or I think the seller deserves it, doesn't matter. I've got to send it back. So we don't want to put, we don't want to get past with 5 days or 7 days. And I've had that situation, and then the agent has to go back to the seller and said, well, we have no choice. The broker has no choice except send the money back. And that's what we did. Now, that's not the end of the road for them, but it certainly makes it difficult. So that's one issue. The other one I want to bring to your attention, because I just had it again, is paragraph D. It says the buyer and seller agree that a broker who holds or distributes deposit monies pursuant to the terms of paragraph 26 or Pennsylvania law will not be liable. Buyer and seller agree that if any broker or affiliated licensee is named in litigation regarding deposit monies, the attorney's fees and costs of the broker and licensees will be paid by the party naming them in litigation. We just had one a week or so ago that I don't know, was it a buyer or seller? Maybe it was a seller, it was a listing.
I think it was a seller.
Yeah, the seller wanted that crossed off. They wanted that crossed off, and I will not allow that to be crossed off. And the reason I will not allow it to be crossed off is we are mandated to hold deposit monies. And by the law, as we all know, and just went over part of it, is I can't release that money just because of the regulations that are in place and the laws that are in place. So I can't release the money. So now I can't release it. I can't do anything, but now I'm going to be sued because the seller or the buyer thinks I should give them the money back. And so PAR put this paragraph in some years ago that says if you want to sue the broker for it, which he has no choice except follow the law, if you want to sue the broker, you're going to pay his costs. So that's why I won't take that one out.
And there was a case within the last couple of years where a broker took it upon himself to release the funds to the party he thought deserved it, and that guy was, I don't remember what the fines were or anything, but you know, some of the worst part about it was he was called out in front of all the realtors in the state for this misappropriation. So it's a very serious offense.
That's your understanding is correct. That's why I don't like title companies holding deposits. Because we did also recently, maybe a year ago, have a title company give the money back to the buyer when actually that money was in dispute. So that created a problem. And they do not have to abide by the same laws that we do. So that's why I'm not excited about title companies at all holding escrow monies.
You might see on a listing that you're writing an offer for in the private remarks where there'll be instructions for you to have the buyer's title company hold the deposit. So just read that as you're going to write in under the deposit line, Keller Williams Real Estate, not the title company. Read that only means that they don't hold the deposit. Therefore, our company, our brokerage will hold the deposit.
Okay, we have some
Yeah, 4C, right? Or no. And 2. Yeah. 2C.
2C, deposits regardless of the form of payment will be paid in US dollars to broker or seller unless otherwise stated here. So the listings that David just talked about, that says to put it with the title company, we want to put in there Keller Williams Real Estate. We want to hold the deposit. We don't want we're representing the buyer. We want to know where that money is, and the best place for it is in our escrow account. Good point. Kristen?
When it comes to an out-of-state buyer, if I have it where they wanted their attorney to hold this, I'm not a fan of that either.
No.
So that's something that we can certainly push back on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And especially if the attorney is not, if the buyer's out of state and their attorney's out of state, definitely not. Definitely not. I don't want anybody out of state holding escrows. Is this a quiz? Uh-huh. Yeah, she ought to close herself. No, we want, can she close herself?
Yes.
In other words, she's going to do the title search and everything? Yeah, that'd be interesting to see what her errors and emissions says about that. I would, yeah, the title work, that's up to her. I mean, if she wants to do the title work, I don't know titles companies E&O insurance policies, but I would expect that if she misses something, she missed it. She's not going to get title title coverage, insurance coverage on it. But anyway, yeah, we don't want deposits held outside of the state for sure. Okay, mediation, paragraph 27. Paragraph 27. Has anybody been through the process of a mediation? What's that? Cassie's in the process. Cassie's in the process. The reason I wanted to bring this up is I found recently from buyers and sellers that the agent, we got into the situation of a dispute over deposit monies, and the buyers and sellers said that their agent could not explain what the process is, and they didn't know, but you have to abide by paragraph 27 because it says. So I think it's important that if we're asking somebody to sign an agreement of sale, that you should know and how to explain it. That's why we've been going through the deep dive of the agreement. But I think we need to know how to explain it. And what I have found in the one case is it was a dual agency case, and in neither situation, the buyer and seller did not understand mediation. There was a $5,000 deposit involved, and the seller expected that she could just go to mediation and she was going to get that $5,000. And that is not the case when you go to mediation. And so I explained the whole process to her. And within that call, I got her down to $2,500. And then I went back to the buyer because he had offered $1,500 to give her $1,500 out of his $5,000 to her, and I got him to go to $2,500, and we resolved it with that without going to mediation. And we always want to try to, even though mediation is a good process, we still want to try to negotiate these things out without going through that process. Without going through that process. So, but mediation says that the buyer and seller will submit all disputes and claims arising out of an agreement, including deposit monies, for mediation. And that mediation for us at PMAR is conducted by PAR. So they will, if somebody is looking to do mediation, they call PAR and they'll talk to a lady by the name of Lisa Aaron out there that runs the mediations, and she will send the forms and discuss the fees that's involved to file the mediation. And then she'll also send them a form to fill out, a 4-page form to fill out, basically describing what the situation is. And when she gets that back, then she'll send it to the other side, the other party. So that's the process. And the paragraph does say legal proceedings may be, I'm halfway through and I don't have the number of line on here, sorry about that. About halfway through it, but if you can pick up where it says legal proceedings may be initiated prior to completion of the mediation process to stop any statute of limitations from expiring, and for the purpose of indexing a lis pendens by buyer to prevent the transfer title to a third party. Anyone know what lis pendens is? You still cover that in the licensing course, lis pendens? What's the lis pendens? I get a lot of threats of lis pendens. Yeah, what they do, what somebody does, in particular, normally, obviously, it's a buyer. They have an interest, but they got into a dispute with the seller, and now the seller wants to move on. So let's say the situation is we have a buyer that has defaulted on a property, and now the seller terminates and they want to put the house back on the market. The question is I'm holding a deposit of $5,000 and I have a termination signed by a buyer, can you put that house back on the market? I'm still holding the $5,000 deposit. Can we put it back on the market? Yes, 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 yes. Everyone agree with yes? That's the right one to agree with. Yeah, you can, because at that point, the termination is signed, and that ended the agreement. And termination is a unilateral termination. And what I mean by that is only one person terminates. Sometimes I see agents give me a termination with both the buyer and seller terminating. They can't terminate. In fact, I think the form even says only one party can sign. Yes. Well, that could be questionable. That could be questionable. I think that that certainly, if you're representing the buyer, you should check and make sure that it is yeah. And if you're representing the seller, then that can be a reason for a dispute. It could, you know what the biggest violation of who's signing the terminations? The biggest violation that I have, or we have?
I can guess.
No, you don't qualify. You're right. You're right. Was that your answer too?
That's definitely my answer.
I'm constantly getting terminations with the buyers terminating under paragraph 8. And if you read paragraph 8, they can't terminate under paragraph 8. Paragraph 8, termination, mortgage contingency termination is a unilateral termination, meaning only one person can terminate, and that's the seller. Buyer cannot terminate. Now, we're not going to go off on a tangent, but I'll answer Kristen's.
You know, that's really what needs to be.
No,
No, they don't have to.
they don't have, the paragraph 8 says that the buyer must make a mortgage application. That means one mortgage application. And then, but what they do have to do is they have to participate in everything that they're asked to participate in order to get that. But they don't have to go and make another mortgage application.
No, they do not. We'll find it.
It's intended. It's actually, yeah, here we go.
Okay. Paragraph C1, within blank days, 7 if not specified, from the execution date of this agreement, buyer will make a completed mortgage application, including payment for and ordering of credit reports.
I mean, it's really only the seller at that point in time, because they're technically still in it until they keep moving forward.
But that would be the spirit of that is, like, say we got a low appraisal, for instance, and as a listing agent, you don't want to wake up in the morning and have a termination for a low appraisal if you know or you think that maybe your seller would be willing to negotiate. You want to keep this going. We always want to keep it going until it can't go any farther. So the spirit of that is, if you get the buyer runs into a problem with financing, he presents that information to the listing side to give the listing side an opportunity to help come to terms with that and find a suitable answer to that problem. And then maybe they could move forward. And if they can't, they can't. But at least they had an opportunity to try to help, which could be paying for points or coming down in price or whatever. They could say, go ahead and switch lenders. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, majority of the time, I think buyers are willing to say, well, if we can switch lenders, they want to buy the house. Now, if you have a buyer that's looking for a way out, that can be a way out, but they can't terminate. They can't terminate for the reason that David is explaining, is give the seller an opportunity to give them an opportunity to maybe reduce the price if the appraisal came in low. Let me tell you a situation I just had beginning of December. Property that this was the third buyer that we had on this property. In this market, I had this property for over a year. And we went through 2 buyers, got strung along, and finally get the third buyer. And some challenges with that one also. And this was, we gave extensions because it was right from the beginning, it wasn't an easy house to sell. And so the seller agreed to give extensions, and that's how we drug it out so many months. But anyway, the third buyer comes along and some issues with the third buyer as well. The agent got him through that. So we had settlement scheduled for 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock the walkthrough was done. At 4 o'clock, a little before, I'm at the title company for closing, and get a call that the buyer's not coming to closing. You just did the walkthrough 2 hours ago, and you're not coming to closing. Well, it turned out, and you don't know who's wrong. He had an out-of-town lender, so it turned out that they made him pay off a credit card. So this buyer with 3 children, when he paid that off, he found out, I don't know why he found out an hour before closing, but he found out that he was only going to have $70 left in his checking account, and he's got 3 kids. So anyway, that's why he did not want to close. Well, you could think that the game was over, but I worked with the seller, and the seller came down, or actually gave more money for seller assist, gave another $6,000 towards seller assist. I gave in some of my commission. The buyer's agent gave in some of her commission, and we ended up going to the closing table 3 days later. But the point is that there's an opportunity there for you to work things out. You just don't walk away from it. So anyway, that's what you call a commission-dectomy.
But in that case, it seemed like no, it wasn't going to happen, right? It's very easy to look at that and say, we're never going to get anywhere, right? But just remember, like, no always means maybe. No always means maybe. Like, if you have time left on the contract, just keep thinking and keep asking questions and keep looking for a solution, because it could be there.
Yep, exactly right. Never say never, right?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
26G.
26G.
But this the limitation of the seller. I mean, maybe you can just explain that sentence, because they're saying a whole lot.
Yep. It actually it starts in paragraph F. Paragraph F says, unless otherwise checked in paragraph 26G, seller may elect to retain those sums paid by buyer, including deposit monies, One, on account of purchase price. So account meaning they still can go back and sue for some more, right? As money applied to seller's damages, they may claim $10,000 in damages. You have $5,000 deposit, so they still could sue them for the other 5,000. Or as liquidated damages for such default. So I have had many attorneys say the same thing. We should always check seller is limited to retaining those sums paid by buyer, including deposit monies as liquidated damages. That means that's all they can get. That's all they can take. They can't go sue for more. They just get that as the liquidated damages. Because in reality, and what every attorney will say, and we all know, in reality, is if you're going to go back after a buyer for money, they probably may have no money anyway. And then who wins on those type of cases? The attorneys, because they're the ones that collect the fees. So that's why we checked off box G. Good point. Thanks for the question. What's that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you're representing, yeah, if you're representing the seller, good point, Kristen. If you're representing the seller and you get an offer on, don't go back to the buyer's agent and say, you ought to check paragraph G. Did you? Yeah. The same way if you get the agreement, we just went over the blank days, 180. You get that's left blank. Yeah. You don't call the buyer's agent and say, was that a mistake? Right? You're representing the seller. You're representing the seller. Okay. Where were we? Who knows? So list pendants, and that's a lot of times, and I've had this many times through the years. Somebody threatened a list pendants. Well, I'll just file list pendants, and they won't be able to sell the property. So there. List pendants isn't that easy to get. You have to go to the court to get it. The judge has to grant it, and you better have a very good reason and show some very good reason why you should be granted that list pendant. So even though a lot of that's thrown around a lot, it's not that easy to get. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The parties agree that all proceedings will be stayed until the completion of mediation and that a court of competent jurisdiction may award attorney's fees to a prevailing party should the court find that the party has unreasonably breached this provision or acted in bad faith. Any agreement reached through mediation and signed by the parties will be binding. Any agreement to mediate disputes or claims arising out of this agreement will survive settlement. Anytime you see those few words, agreement will survive settlement, that means settlement can happen, but the situation is not over. So as is, if you have settlement, typically everything is done and closed, but that does survive, so you can continue with mediation. So that's just a paragraph 27. So let's talk about mediation. Now we have a situation where we have a case that a buyer wants to file mediation. This form that you can download for free at nar.realtor. You can download for free at nar.realtor.
I don't know.
So I would recommend that if you have a buyer or a seller that wants to do mediation or talks about mediation, you definitely want to give them this flyer because it explains it. And quite frankly, it doesn't hurt put in your buyer packet or your seller packet anyway, because it does explain as we talk about mediation. And mediation is not the same as arbitration. And I have sometimes people get them confused, mediation and arbitration, two different processes totally. So what's mediation? It's the act or process of mediating intervention between conflicting parties to promote reconciliation, settlement, or compromise. And it states why use mediation, and it gives you the difference between mediation and arbitration. Gives you the differences between the two. And the key feature is the parties decide to enter the mediation process unless the association has adopted mandatory mediation. Parties can leave the mediation process at any time, and the parties have complete control over the outcome. So you have a mediator. I have not done mediations in a number of years, but I did attend and got certified as a NAR certification back, I think, in about 2012. So I spent a week going through mediation and went through mediation and got trained to be an NAR mediator. And we talked about role play, I think, at the last team meeting. That is certainly the place that I got very, very serious on role playing, because there was a 5-day course. We were in Chicago for 5 days, 5-day course. And on the last day, there was not a test, was you had to be the mediator in a mock mediation. And the one that I had to present to, I draw the short straw. The one that I got to be the mediator for involved a retired federal judge. Every one of those mediations, and NAR, if you ever have an opportunity to get training at NAR level, NAR has top-notch training, and they get the best. But every one of us had either an attorney, a retired attorney, or a judge, and there was only one judge, and I got him. So I practice role playing in my room at night. I did my mediation in front of the mirror several times to practice for the next day. That's how serious I took it, and that certainly was my breakthrough for being not liking role playing. But it was a great experience. Unfortunately, after that, I did a couple of mediations, and then we didn't get enough of them, and I went about a year not having any mediation at all. And I said, no, I'm not getting enough to really do this properly. So I dropped out. I didn't want to, if I can't do enough that I can keep it up. Now I'll tell you who is a mediator and has been a number of years is Tony Caracazza with KPG. Many of you may know that he is a mediation. He does a lot of them down in southeast Pennsylvania. Okay. So we have an impartial mediator that understands the issues quickly and mediates only matters in which he or she remains neutral and impartial, discloses conflicts of interest. Parties may agree to continue following disclosure or terminate the session if there's a conflict of interest found. Facilitates and assists in negotiations, honors the concepts of self-determination, respect, and civility, enters the parties' abilities to understand their own and each other's needs, helps parties understand the alternatives to settling, and talks about how it's worked. It's a confidential process, but the process overview is on the back page or on the front, whichever you want to determine the brochure. The process is 10 days prior to the session. The parties receive a letter explaining the mediation process and addressing logistical issues. Parties agree to mediate. Mediator is selected, appointed by a random rotation, mutual request or objection to a proposed mediator. So the both sides know who the mediator is before they go into it. So if they happen to know or they're concerned about a conflict of interest, they can voice that, and another mediator would be appointed. Witness and or attorneys may attend, but it's not necessary because the process non-adversarial. There are no findings of fact in this. Arbitration, you have a finding of facts. Information is exchanged. Parties need not prepare exhibits or extensive documentation. If a document will clarify an issue, it may be used, but parties are reminded the mediation is not a fact-finding conference. So the mediator, during the conference, the mediator explains the process and goals, including the mediators and parties' roles. The parties' initial statements, each party, now keep in mind, they're going to both be in the same room at the same table. So it's not like they're not going to be facing the other side, even though they may have had a lot of words before this, but they're going to be at the same table. And each side gets to give their story of their understanding and their vetting. The issues are identified. Agenda is created. We have crosstalk. Parties respond to each other and explore information, needs, and ideas. And so the two parties are sitting at the table. The mediator is asking questions, getting them to talk, getting them to understand each other's situation and position. With the mediator's assistance, parties, then it will go into a caucus. After the two parties have gone through that process, then the crosstalk process, then they will caucus. One party leaves the room, mediator talks to the one party, their excuse, the other party comes in, and the mediator will talk through some alternatives. And then the conclusion. An agreement is reached or signed before leaving mediation, and all parties agree with no further progress can be, or that no further progress can be made. In this case, the parties are free to pursue arbitration. So it's not the last step, but the whole idea of mediation is to try to prevent the court situation going before into the courts or even into arbitration. So again, if you have buyers and sellers, mediation is not a situation where you're going to walk away with all the money. Because if you are adamant that you're not going to negotiate whatsoever, the mediation is not going to work from the beginning. Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, there are no jackpots in mediation. There are no jackpots in mediation. Has anybody gone through an arbitration? Anyone go through an arbitration? Arbitration is a little different. Arbitration, you have a panel, an arbitration panel. Typically, it'll be three. We have consumer arbitration, then we have arbitration between brokers as well. We have mandatory arbitration, we have voluntary. But if consumers are arbitrating, you're going to have a panel of three, and they're going to listen to each side. They're going to do the finding of facts. What are the facts of the transaction? What are the facts of the situation? That's the finding of the facts. They're going to look at those finding of the facts, and then the arbitration panel, the panel of three, are going to come to a conclusion of, are they going to award it to one side only, or are they going to split it? Are they going to split the monies between the two parties, 50-50, 60-40, whatever it could be? I have found that most arbitrations end up splitting the money. Arbitrators with the panels come up with splitting the money because there's always some gray areas and so forth, so ends up splitting the money. So getting the full deposit back is not necessarily an easy thing to do. And that's why I encourage all of you, when we get into these situations, try to negotiate it out. Try to negotiate it out because the one that I just mentioned to you with the $5,000 is that one, the mediation already started. the seller already filed the mediation with PAR. And negotiating it out, then she pulled the application back, got her fee back. But it was still better on both sides, rather than take the time to go to a mediation process where you're gonna, one party was out of town, the seller was local, obviously, but the buyer was out of town. And he said, I don't want to go through this, that expense. So you can negotiate these deposits out, and that's the best thing that you can do. Try to negotiate them out. And certainly if you get into a situation that you're uncomfortable with or you're not sure of, certainly come to David or I, and we'll help you through the process, or we'll negotiate them out.
And this is definitely one of the many paragraphs, like all the paragraphs, I guess, that is really, really helpful, that you have a very thorough explanation of what that paragraph means way, way, way in the beginning, like during your consultation, when you're listing a property and you're talking to your seller, for instance, about what the process is. And in the event that the buyer defaults or appears to default and you'd like to get the deposit, this is the process that you go through. You don't want this explanation to be happening when things are emotional. You want this explanation to be happening when everybody is feeling on board and in the learning process, so that they can absorb it. And then when things get emotional later, you're just reminding them of what the process is, rather than trying to explain it to them at the time. So it's important.
And David's right. It's important to do it early on, and even when you're going over the agreement of sale, to explain what mediation is. And again, that's why I recommend to even give a copy of this brochure to both the buyer and the seller. You know, you can go over the paragraph 27 when you're going over the agreement of sale. And hopefully we're not going to get into this, but I need to explain what mediation is for you. And I'm going to give you this brochure. No different, right, than you're sitting at a settlement table and the title person is going over the mortgage with the buyer and telling them all the negative stuff, that if you're late on your mortgage, this is going to happen, and if you don't take care of the property, you're not going to have the property, and all that. You know, they explain it because the buyer needs to know. Is it going to happen? 99 times out of 100, no, it's not going to happen. But they need to know the process. Any questions? Any questions? If there are, David, answer them. I got to tie my boots so I don't trip over and be laying on the floor here. I was never good at teaching a class laying on the floors. Okay, are we all done with mediation? No questions? We're good? We all know how to explain it now? Okay. So now we had a request to go over some addendums, because we do have a lot of them. We do have a lot of them, right? So we're going to go over the situation that you have a buyer that there's four different forms here. So I will unconfuse them for you. So you have a buyer that comes in and says, "Oh, I'm interested in looking at a property." You qualify them; they're good. There's only one problem. What's the problem? What's the problem? The problem is they have a house to sell. Should be one of your first qualifying questions, right? First qualifying question. You have a house, you need to sell your house first? Yeah, I need to sell my house first. Do you have it on the market? No. I'm not gonna put it on the market until I know I have something. What's that? Yeah, that's right. So, no, so, okay, so I'm gonna show you houses. I'm gonna show you these 27 houses here today. And you pick one out, and no big deal about not selling your house here because we have addendums that cover that. How many use these addendums? Experienced agents, obviously. There's only one.
Yes.
There's Ally, do you use them? I don't want to interrupt your conversation here. What's that? Okay. So we have different scenarios. We have different scenarios here. That's why we have 4 different forms. And out of the 4, there's only one that I like, and that's what some of you are alluding to. But let's go from the worst to the best. Shall we do it that way? We'll go from the worst to the best. What's that? Yeah, we have a couple of them. So, which one is the worst? I say the worst one. The worst one from a seller standpoint is sale and settlement of other property contingency addendum to the agreement of sale. SSP. It's an awful one? Yeah, it's an awful one. SSP. Yeah. So what it says is that the agreement of sale is contingent upon the sale and settlement of buyer's property, and you put in the buyer's address, obviously. Buyer's property is currently listed for sale or will be listed for sale within blank days, 2 if not specified, of seller's acceptance of the agreement of sale under exclusive right to sell with a broker of buyer's choosing who is a member of a multiple listing service most directly serving the area. Buyer will do what is reasonably necessary to sell and settle buyer's home, blah, 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 blah. Buyer's property is or will be listed at or below, and you put in a figure there. That's interesting, right? Maybe they don't have their house listed, so maybe they don't even know what it's worth, but they'll put a figure in there. They'll come up with something.
And as a listing agent, you're getting this, they're probably selling this property in another state. So do you know if that's a reasonable price
Right,
for that house?
exactly.
You have no
Absolutely.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Right.
Where they did like a clean something, they could. House show, I don't remember the whole scenario, but he already had offered before it was actually on the market. Yeah, so it was a lot different. Like, yeah, I wouldn't do it.
I'll give them $10 for that house. There's an offer.
Things are moving so quickly that you could almost use this form comfortably, because it was actually more risky to put it on the market, get a buyer, and then try to look, because back then, during 2020 to 22, this form, I could see how it would be helpful.
Yeah, it's not in your forms letter.
Now it's not. It was deleted. But you have people that were trying to buy, and it was just like, they didn't want to be homeless.
Yeah, but the challenge then from the seller side was, we're in multiple offers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Cause that's the fear to sell, the buyers, like they're gonna sell their house and they're not gonna be able to find, they're not gonna find something. I think the lender would be the first step in that scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Terms, like they have to,
time zones and stuff, but, you know, has to be done certain times.
Yeah. Yeah, first, and Ally and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. First, I think if you're, when you get a buyer in, and I'll tell you how I handle these buyers, because I get them too. If I have a buyer that comes to me and I have that initial consultation, and do you have a house? Yes, we own a house. Do you have to sell it to buy another one? Yes, we have to sell it to buy another one. Do you have it on the market? No, I want to find the house first, and then I'll put it on the market. I don't want to be homeless. And then my next comments is, well, really at this point, you're not ready to buy a house because you have a house to sell. Nobody knows how long that is going to take to sell. And even in today's market, that's the truth. We don't know how long it's going to.
They let me find our area and we get a handful and work together and make it easy to do. So, you know, you could suss out and then have a conversation with, let's say, New Jersey and California.
Yeah, it's an opportunity definitely for you to get a referral. So you don't want to miss that up. And then with the referral and knowing the agent, that is a help. But it's still, even with a good agent, you don't know when the property is going to sell. And the other thing I say to the buyer is, you know, we're gonna make an offer, and it's going to be contingent upon you listing your house and selling your house. What happens when the buyer of your house has the same contingency? You see how this can snowball? So bottom line is, what I do with a buyer like that is I tell them, you know, right now you're not in a position to really buy a home, especially one that is getting good activity. And the reason it's getting good activity, because it's a good value, is if you want to see a couple of homes to get an idea of what you can buy in our area, I'd be happy to show you a few homes today. But then you need to get your house on the market. And then I stay in contact with them and how's the progress going? You know, keep in touch with them every week or so, find out how the progress is going. But I don't use this addendum. I'm with Ally. I don't use this addendum. That's why I call it the worst, because when you look at it, is the seller is taking the house off the market, right? Seller's taking the house off the market with the hopes that they're going to the buyer is going to get a buyer for their house. That's what this is stating. So, so there's no guarantee. It's all negative from my point of view for the seller, and no advantage to it. So if I had an offer come in on one of my listings with this contingency, my recommendation to the seller would be to reject it. Let's keep it on the market. Paragraph 5 is after blank days. That's you put a date in there. If buyer's property is not under an agreement of sale with terms acceptable to seller may terminate the agreement by written notice to buyer, and all deposit money is paid back to the purchaser, to the buyer. So you put a time limit on there. So you might put 30 days on there. You might put 45 days on there. You might put 60 days on there. Or you could put 0 and then cancel the next day. So one of the reasons, the other reason that I want to go over these forms is because in the past several weeks, I've signed a lot of escrow checks, and the reason for the termination was these addendums, because you folks are getting agreements of sale, signing the agreements of sale up with these type of addendums, and now it bottoms out. So now you've wasted all that time. Now you're back and you don't have a sale. So that's why I don't.
That sellers can't see. Just for them, they have families, they for them, or something, you know, to help them in the interim. This one will be able to take advantage of the market.
Absolutely.
Get them- They never get assisted. They're never gonna, it's just gonna go and go and go. There's never like, so if there's a way to.
I think they're from Annie, the lender, and I know that they have a product that's not a grid. Right. It's not, yeah, I don't know about her, and you can bridge it, and you're basically buying like a regular offer.
Yeah.
In order to make it competitive, but it, I think what they do, I don't. Yeah.
Bridges is risky and annoying.
Yeah, the man called me about it, and he was talking to me about it, he's like, they don't even go through this process, and it's really easy, and so, I mean, that's just, there's options, other than, this is the last option, right?
Yeah, there are other options. The other option that I have used and have been successful at is putting an extended closing date on the offer. So instead of putting in 30 or 45 days, I might put in 90 days. Now that could be counter offered also, but I put in 90 days and I've already put in 120 days, because that can give the seller some nice wiggle room also, depending on what their needs are. Now, maybe if you're in a multiple situation, you may not necessarily be competitive with extending a closing like that. But you don't know, you may be competitive, because that may work for the seller. I had multiple offers not that long ago, and the reason that the seller took a offer for $7,000 less is because the buyer could be flexible on closing. So it's not the price always, it's the some other terms that can come into it. So I've done it that way, but if they go back, they put their home on the market, yeah, it'll sell in 2 weeks. Then you call them in a week, how much, you have any activity? Yeah, I had one showing. Call in 2 weeks. I'll forget that 2 weeks, that doesn't work. Not going to sell in 2 weeks. We only had one more showing. It gets into reality, but the reality's played, if doing it my way, the reality's played on their dime, not my seller's dime, if I'm representing the seller.
Yeah, and you know, even if they come to you with the excuse of, well, this house, your house has been sitting on the market for a while, okay, great, then maybe it'll still be here, once you clean up your business. Right? Yeah, and what you know, once you accept the offer, you know, you have to have, oh, you know what, then maybe this will be here. You have to act together, bring some money, then the floor. I'll get it, and then come back and go, show me the money.
Whip them into shape. Yeah, whip them into shape. All right. Any questions on that form? Let's move on to runner-up for the worst form. It's SSP TKO, knockout. Sale and settlement of other property contingency with right to continue marketing and timed kickout clause. So this one's a little better. This is a little better because it's saying that the sale is still contingent upon the buyer's property selling, and the same paragraph as the last one, they're going to list it, or they're going to list it within 2 days. And what they're going to list it at, and the buyer acknowledges that the seller has the right to continue to offer the seller's property for sale to other prospective buyers. That's the better part of this form. It is now not like the last one. This one, the seller can continue to market the property. So it stays on the market, stays on the market. I knew you were going to ask that question. Yeah, So that's where, that's where it gets hairy from a listing side, right? So now we have a contract on it. And now do we list it as active C? Or we just, don't tell anybody, we have a contract on it? Because what happens when you put them in as active C? What's that? Yeah,
See it. But- Reflect, but we're not seeing.
that's why I really don't want to show them. But Ally's right. If they want to see that property, you better show it to them.
But Ken, this has always been the sticky point. So my buyers like, can we just put an offer in and can we just, what's the responsibility, what happens to this offer if they want to put an offer in, but there's an offer in hand, they're under contract? Is there a responsibility of the listing agent to present that offer, or is it just kind of hold it? I'm like, hey, it's gonna fall into the abyss of everything. Let's see if that's actually available. But that's what Matthew says, marketing, it doesn't say,
It doesn't say, yeah, it doesn't say
it
that,
just says marketing, it
right.
doesn't say anything about presenting other offers. That's a two different things.
because what you're talking about, what Ally's talking about is really a backup offer. And I don't want backup offers.
See it. It doesn't say anything about the, unless you have, which, unless there's something in there that says the seller can then terminate any other offer.
Yeah. Well, this one does, yeah, this one takes that out because they can accept,
So
they can, yeah, they can, yeah, they can receive it. Now, if you're representing the seller, I would review that offer with them. But keep in mind, in this one, they've got 48 hours. Well, they may have 72 hours. It depends on what is put in there. But I would not have a seller sign a second agreement of sale, because what happens in that 72 hour or that 48 hours or 72 hours, that buyer comes up and takes that contingency out. So we don't want to do that. But yeah, you can't, you don't want to get into, well, I'll just submit another offer. That's backup offers, and they are fraught with and most attorneys will tell you to stay away from backup offers completely. Yeah,
Why do they use that?
yeah. Well, from a and you know, in a different market that we haven't seen for a while, in a different market, sometimes sellers are happy. Well, I have a fish on the line. Maybe at least I have a fish on the line. For the last 7 months, I don't have any fish. So maybe I'll want to get a fish on there, and hopefully something will go together on it. But the downside, the other downside to this form with the kickout clause, typically it's 48 or 72 hours. The kickout clause, the difficulty is if you have a seller may lose another qualified buyer, because if you have a buyer that really needs to buy and they've got 2 properties that they're interested in, and you've got one that they're not going to know for 3 days whether they can have it or not, they may go on, and I've had that situation, they'll go on to their second choice because they don't want to risk losing their second choice waiting for the first choice. So that's the downside with it. But anyway, that we tore that up, but we still have the form there. Oh, the other thing on the agency, on the active contingency, I'll be right to you. The active contingency is PMAR is the only one that I know of right now that has the active contingency. NAR is very clear. NAR rules are very clear that under contract means under contract. No, there's no such thing as active contingency. And if you go to Pike Wayne, you'll never see an active contingency, because in Pike Wayne, they had a member that complained to NAR, and NAR came down on the Pike Wayne MLS and said, under contract is under contract. You can't, there is no such thing as active contingencies. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. Rika,
Ability to have a pick out a good, whatever the requirements and documents. I've never read anything in private remarks that says, hey, we have a pick out clause or anything. Is there any obligation to that in? Pick out, like, would you want?
You know, you-
I think if you, if I was. In remarks.
I don't know anything, I need to be able to read that, it's definitely not someone else with a contract with the.
And if I was-
you're,
Well, like, the point is, like, well, if they have a kick-out clause, wouldn't it be to the seller's best interest for them to advertise them, at least in private remarks, like, hey, we have a kick-out right up to my date, so that I am motivated to show it, you know? I don't know, I don't know anything about that, so I know.
no, I agree with you. I think if you have if you would get your seller to sign this, under distress, they would sign it. Duress, okay, maybe distress also. Then I think it would be a good idea to put in there 48-hour kickout clause. Because now you know that if your buyer comes in and signs a new offer, they have a chance of getting it. Active C, they don't. I don't, and I think if you're putting active C in the listing to satisfy your seller, that, oh yeah, we'll still keep it on the market. You need to tell them that I have to put it in the MLS as active C. And I have to tell you also that the showings are going to go way down because most good agents are not going to show active Cs. So just-
you should tell
just
the
be
seller
aware.
that the real reason we're doing an activist fee so I can capture more buyer leads. I mean, that's what I think, that's my feeling is how that gets used a lot, because there's some brokerages that just use that as a standard operating procedure.
Right. 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 Yeah. It can hurt the seller that way also. So anyway, we're down to paragraph 5, and it's 2:15. So if the buyer receives a bona fide offer for the buyer's property, buyer will promptly notify seller in writing by providing a copy of the agreement of sale for buyer's property within blank days, 2 if not specified. If receiving a copy of the agreement of sale for buyer's property, seller will inform buyer in writing whether they accept the agreement of sale or they reject the agreement of sale. Seller's written rejection must contain a specific reason for the rejection to allow buyer an opportunity to renegotiate the agreement for the sale of the buyer's property. If seller has not, within the time stated in paragraph 5A of this addendum, responded to buyer's notice, seller accepts the agreement of sale for the buyer's property. So watch your dates again. Watch your dates again. So the buyer submits the offer that they got on their house, and then the seller has 2 days or 5 days, whatever days you put in there, to accept it or reject it. Why would a seller reject the? Could be terms. Yeah, could be terms.
Not required.
If they do not reject it within the number of days, correct? Yep. Within blank hours, 24 if not specified, receiving written notification that seller rejects the agreement of sale for buyer's property. Buyer may provide written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed without the sale and settlement of buyer's property, and this agreement is no longer contingent on the sale. So within 24 hours of receiving written notification that seller rejects the agreement of sale for buyer's property, buyer may provide written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed with the sale. Or a copy of a renegotiated new agreement of sale is provided. And seller has 24 hours to respond to buyer's renegotiated new agreement. And then paragraph 6 is the same thing. If buyer's property is not under agreement of sale within acceptable to seller within on or before blank, seller may terminate the agreement. If seller receives a bona fide offer, so now we have the kick-out clause in place, but now the seller has received another bona fide offer from a different prospective buyer with terms acceptable to seller, seller will promptly notify buyer in writing of seller's receipt of that acceptable offer and seller's intent to terminate this agreement of sale within blank hours 24, if not specified, of receiving written notification that seller has received a bona fide offer and terms acceptable to seller. Buyer will provide written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed without the sale and settlement of buyer's property or a copy of an agreement of sale. So if the seller receives a bona fide offer from a different prospective buyer, it's the buyer still has 24 hours or 48, whatever you put in there, hours to show that they can buy the home, that they can move forward without selling their home. So the question I have is, why didn't you cover that before you go through all this? Yeah, the settlement's coming in.
This, okay, also offers, you know what, we'll get 600,000 cash. Yes. My bro, no, we get 221 and 25 cents. Multiple off, oh, it's 600,000 cash, you're like, bro. So the first buyers, if they can come up with money in 24 hours, they have the ability.
Now,
Right.
You get money.
yeah, absolutely.
Can't do it same game and this.
Yeah. Yeah, so all I'm saying with buyers that you have in this situation, you know, think about the time and do you want to really have consultation with them and go through the process and get them to be a qualified buyer, because this is not necessarily a qualified buyer. You know, then you can argue, well, if they they're really in a hot market. I know my house will sell. Or, okay, we have another addendum that we can use instead of this one.
So they, for a 60-day loan or a 90-day close out of the buyer and get their shit together in order, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
And I just told them, I'm sorry, this one is good, because you have trouble with those. I'll say that.
Don't do
I'm
that.
joking.
No, she says that, I hear her.
This,
There's a disadvantage of being next to my office.
this is being recorded.
Maybe you're robustly for you on the other side.
Right. Robustly. That's a new word. Melissa, did you have? Okay. And then paragraph B on the back of the page, it says, within 2 days of receiving the written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed without the sale and settlement of the property or receiving a copy, seller will inform buyer that they've accepted the written proof. Again, you're probably not going to see that. If you do, then you should have asked for it before and structured it differently.
with the expiration date, not just in 2 days or 20.
Yeah.
I would put, this is the date it expires, because you can see this being so messy, where one buyer's like, no, we have time, and the other.
Yeah.
It is getting real messy if you're not clear with date.
Okay. Right. Confusing myself here. I'm reading the same ones did have. SSPCM, sale and settlement of other property with the right to continue marketing addendum to the agreement of sale. Goes through, we all have that one in front of us? They're printed on two sides. It's a shorter form. It's a shorter form. So this one's better than the last one, than the kickout clause. And it is sale and settlement of other property with the right to continue marketing addendum to the agreement of sale. And this one goes through the same thing. This agreement of sale is contingent upon the sale and settlement of the property. Buyer acknowledges seller has the right to continue to offer the property the seller's market for sale to other prospective buyers. In the event seller accepts another agreement of sale for seller's property from another buyer, the agreement is terminated. But let me ask you this, if you're working with a buyer, why would you use this? Right? Why would you use it? There's no protections in this one for the buyer at all. They're allowing the seller to leave their house on the market, and another buyer comes along, and now the seller gets another bona fide offer, and it's terminated. So the buyer's out. Seller would immediately notify the buyer in writing of the termination, and deposit money go back to the buyer. Seller's right to market the property and accept another agreement of sale will cease upon seller's written approval of the terms and conditions of an agreement of sale of buyer's property. Seller's right to continue marketing property is renewed if buyer's agreement of sale is terminated. If buyer's property is not under agreement of sale with terms acceptable to seller on or before blank, then the seller can terminate. Anyone like this one?
You can counter it, and get somebody sale. If you wanted to, you could counter with this, say, okay, yeah, that's fine, but we'll use this form instead.
Yeah.
It's their job to read it.
That'll go a long way in court.
You know. Then I actually use part of the market. You read them.
Yes.
The attorney for the buyer wanted to have. And the changes too. Thinking right now, like, what is pretty? Because it's not, I mean, I don't think the building is. Maybe there's a COVID, but you know, but not the change order, but not.
I can't imagine why an attorney would ever say that. Yeah.
Like seriously, like.
It's a double agent.
Yeah. 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 I don't know why. I don't know why a seller or an attorney representing a buyer would ever, even in a normal situation, would recommend using this. Yeah. Joe McDonald?
Yeah.
Huh. I know Joe well. Yeah.
He's smarter than that.
Huh?
He's smarter than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know Joe well. He's a great attorney. He's a good attorney. I can't imagine why he would say that. You know it too, don't you?
Yeah.
What's,
So that just like, I mean, that maybe this is a little bit like parallel to that or something like that, but you know, if the thing with using these forms, right? If you're going to use these forms, they're confusing. They can be really confusing, and we have to be able to explain these thoroughly to our clients, you know, buyer or seller, of what the ramifications are using these forms, right?
Yep.
And so if you're tempted to use one of these forms, make sure you understand it and you can explain it thoroughly. And go back to what Bob is saying originally is just go sell your house and then let's talk, you know, or let me call a listing agent for you and get your house on the market and then get you down the road. Then we can use this form, you know. But we have to be able to, we can't just like willy-nilly say, oh, I have a form for that, because man, they're tricky to explain to people.
Robert?
This form was being, and everything was going along smooth, and the buyer got an offer on his property. Now present that to the seller, and you want to get it. Is there a form for that, or are we just doing it at that moment? Seller accepts the terms of buyer offer, seller their property.
Right. What I would do, what I would do is a change in terms, taking this out. Taking this out, but adding another form. So did everybody understand what Robert's question was? Yeah, repeat, please. I got a request for a repeat.
Wait a minute.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Wait, just be quiet for a minute.
Suppose you're using this form, any of the others where it makes a reference to the buyer's obligation to show the offer on their property. And you have to get the seller, so let's go to paragraph 4, right, where it says, seller's right to market the property and accept another agreement of sale will cease upon the seller's written approval of the terms and conditions of the agreement of sale for the buyer's property. How are you getting that written agreement? So my question was, is there a form for that, or are we doing an addendum? And Bob's advice was to do a change in terms.
Okay, yeah. So unlike the other forms that we saw there, the seller's right to market the property and accept another agreement of sale will cease upon seller's written approval of the terms and conditions of an agreement of sale for property. So they've got to submit their offer on their house, and then they can either accept it or not. The downfall on this one is that it doesn't go on to say that the seller has X number of days to approve it or whatever, like the other form that we went over. So if that was the case and the seller says, okay, I'm good with that, then I would do a change in terms in taking this addendum out and adding the best one out of the 4. And that one is settlement of other property contingency. Okay? So I would void this one out, but I would still make it contingent upon the settlement of other property, because now this buyer's got their property under contract, and now it's just a matter of having it completed and go to settlement. The reason that you want to make sure, if you're voiding this one out, you want to make sure that you get this signed, is because something still could happen to that transaction for the buyer. And now if you don't have this contingency in there, then the buyer could have a major problem, because they have to perform on the current agreement of sale. Does everybody follow that?
Babysit that part, sale. It's one of the sale. On the conditions. While we end, what contingencies are there, what are the timeline, but I want everything to go there. We recommend. I'm a pain in the ass, you know that.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
But you're right. you're representing you're representing your seller. You're absolutely right.
Sure. So that actually happens, but even when it is, details, like, I wanna know, how many, like, this happened where we were 3 in. So we have contingency, yeah, and then put it together, yeah, but it was like, I was a lot of work.
Say those New York deals,
Yeah.
let me tell you, nothing can fall on real easy, serious, and I wish I was joking, the New York deal, be real easy, expecting it to be contingent on, in New York, because they don't care anytime. And they don't care if they're gonna lose on the CPA, they literally don't care. Yeah, but New York is worse. Yeah, and the lender there, the New York lender, your timelines are gonna get stretched out, you're gonna be delayed, you're not gonna get answers, your attorney will not answer you, they don't care about you. Like, no, I'm serious, so if it's in New York, get ready and really think about if it's worth.
Make the phone calls, I'll try to call the attorney.
Yeah, but they don't call you back, they don't care, and they're just like, sorry, and then trying to coordinate it, sometimes your stuff gets extended a week or two, you know why? Because the attorneys cannot make it, both attorneys can't make it through the closing, so if both of them are not available, you're not closing.
Yeah, there's a couple of major problems with New York. One is already been mentioned, that it doesn't have time is of the essence. New York is not a time is of the essence state. And the second big problem is that real estate agents can't do the agreement of sale. Attorneys have to do the agreement of sale. So if you have a New York buyer that says, yeah, I have a contract on my house, you better see that contract, because they may only have an offer that's or a memo, and because the attorneys have to draw up the agreements of sale.
And like. They'll do inspections, they'll do COs, they do all that before they even have a written.
They also have like court.
Yep, and they can lose the contract, because I've had people where they're under contract and they think they're getting the next, and they're like, oh, somebody else came in and offered more money, so the seller don't get.
Yeah.
We're real careful, just read everything. If you get stuff, even if there's a, certificate of occupancy or inspections that need to be done, if the municipality is there, and you can just be waiting.
Yeah.
So the agent on the other side, if we don't respond, us.
Yeah.
And it's not, so, it's literally, they stop answering because they haven't answered.
Yeah, I've had different times, people from New York say, we don't do it this way, and when I'm going over something, well, we don't do it this way in New York. I said, well, I'm glad we don't do things the way New York does. And and I'm not sure if they still do it, but New York closings, you literally brought your checkbook as a buyer, because you wrote a separate check. The title companies did not do any dispersing. You wrote a separate check for everything. So anyway, we're not in New York anymore.
Stuff like people dealing with another state aren't, like Alex said, they may or may not want to respond, and they don't have the same sense of urgency because it's not the way they do. They don't have to perform that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Honor about.
And you have a lot of attorneys in New York, they don't have a telephone. They do everything by letter. They don't call the other, they have to send them a letter. Then they wait for a letter to come back.
Yeah, they're the phone call.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so the last of the four is the best one, and actually we really need to use this. Anytime you have a buyer, certainly when you're qualifying them, find out about, do they own another property? Is it under contract? Yeah, it's under contract. Well, it's under contract and looks real good. still want to make sure that you use settlement of other property contingency, SOP, standing operating procedure. Because, and we've had a couple of cases where agents did not use this, buyer had house to sell, did not use this form, and then the transaction fell apart on their house that they were selling in New Jersey. Now there's a problem, right? We don't have a contingency, and now the buyer doesn't have a buyer either. So now they've got a problem. So you need to be sure to use this. And it's a real simple form. It's contingent upon their property. It's understood that the agreement of sale, property is under agreement of sale with settlement to take place on and before, and still do your due diligence, like Kristen said. Get a copy of that agreement of sale. Where are you at in it? All the inspections are all completed. We have mortgage commitment and all. Make some calls. Call the mortgage lender down there. Find out. Follow through. You're representing your seller, so you're doing your fiduciary duty. Follow up and make these calls. Any other comments, questions on this one? Okay. Do you want to go over the post settlement, David?
Sure. And Ally may approach the education committee to see if we can get somebody here to discuss New York real estate law. So the other form is the post-settlement possession addendum to the agreement of sale. This is,
Now, when would you use that one?
when would I use that? I can answer how often I would use that. So, this is another, proceed with caution, not to take this lightly. Post-settlement possession, the agreement of sale would mean that the seller would want to retain some use of the property, right? Well, I can't move out on settlement date, or the mover was delayed on settlement date, or do I really have to move out when I sell the house? Some questions that could come up. So this is a form, of course, that is signed by both parties. If you're going to use it, the buyer would have to be in agreement that it's okay. For instance, the seller may want to store furniture in the garage or something like that, or maybe the seller needs to live in the house for 2 weeks until they get into the next house, something like that, right? So these are, I'm sure there's many, many, many other possibilities why you would want to use this, right? One of at the top of the form says this form is not recommended to be used for periods that exceed 30 days. If the situation requires more than 30 days, you need to have a lease signed, right? That's the way it works. If the seller's gonna stay in the property for more than 30 days, it becomes a tenant and they have a lease. So vacating, the purpose, and then you have the vacating date. The seller will vacate the property on or before whatever date is agreed to, less than 30 days, of course. There's an occupancy fee. Seller will pay buyer an occupancy fee per diem, right? From settlement to the date the seller vacates. Why would that be? Well, because they're occupying that property and the buyer, the new owner, has expenses. They have to possibly pay a mortgage. They're going to have to pay taxes and insurance and things like that. So, they should be compensated. That's all the terms on here, of course, are negotiable.
Yeah, excuse me, Dave. I've used this form several times, but use it with caution. I try not to do it. If it means delaying closing for a few days because the seller needs a few more days to get out, I'd rather reschedule the closing for a few days later, just so that it's much cleaner transaction when the seller is completely out, because you don't know if there's damage done to the property when the seller is moving out. But there are situations, as David said, that maybe they just can't get it. They have some things they just want to store in the garage for 2 weeks or something like that. You still would use this form, but but use it with caution. But then the question comes up, I get the question often is, well, how much do I charge per diem? And David pretty much explained it, most buyers are okay when they ask you, and the buyer's gonna ask you, how much should I charge? Most buyers are gonna want the per diem, what the mortgage is costing them, what the taxes is costing them per day, and what the insurance is costing them per day. And most buyers, not that I've done that many of them, but the ones I've done, they're satisfied with that. But they could tack something else onto that if they wanted. But that's pretty much because they've got carrying costs and they don't want to be paying a mortgage and the taxes and insurance for somebody else living in the house.
So, this starts to sound like a rental, right? There's a deposit. You want to have a deposit. And the reason being, the seller's still there, they're occupying the property, or even if they have just use of the garage, are they going to damage something when they're moving things out? They're going to, scratch the wall, put a dent in the wall, are they going to, break the garage door, whatever they're going to do? There could be a deposit here, which is held by the buyer until the vacating date. Within 30 days of vacating date, buyer has to refund that, providing the seller is not in default of the agreement. Buyer will inspect the property within 2 days after seller vacates the property. So, you want to be able to document the condition of the house at the time of settlement. You want to be able to document the condition of the house within 2 days of when the seller moves out in case there's any damages. Utilities, seller shall pay from settlement through vacating date for utilities. Or you can maybe work it into that per diem, whichever. You don't have to check these. There's pets, there's maintenance. Seller agrees to maintain the property in the same condition. Any changes, seller will not make changes or improvements to the property unless required by the terms of this agreement or otherwise agreed in writing, by the buyer in writing. Seller's going to get property insurance. This is very much like a lease. There's continues again like a lease. Buyer's not responsible for injury or damage to seller or seller's guests that occur on the property. Then you have 11, entry. Seller shall receive a set of keys or combination to permit entry during occupancy. And then goes into seller's default. The dates and time of the performance of any obligation, the addendum are hereby agreed to be of the essence. So we're still in time as of the essence. They have to vacate on a certain amount. The deposit gets returned on certain dates, all these things. So the buyer, of course, has the option of retaining the security deposit for unpaid fees or damages. In the event the buyer institutes legal proceedings to recover sums due and owing under the terms of this addendum, or to have the seller removed from the property, seller shall pay buyer all costs that buyer incurs as a result, including court costs and attorney's fees. Parties are advised to consult legal counsel to ensure they fully understand the relationship that this agreement creates. Those last two things maybe should be in bold. Right? Seller shall pay the buyer for all costs, right? And all parties are advised to consult legal counsel. Seller may not assign the seller's rights to this addendum to anybody else. You can't say, they can't say, look, I'm going to move my furniture out, but I got 5 more days to their cousin Jimmy that they can move their stuff in for the remainder. It doesn't work that way. And 14, Bob's favorite, smokescreen, indemnification. Seller will indemnify and hold harmless buyers, agents, subagents, employees, any other officer or party, or any one of them, or any other person, firm, corporation, or anybody else in the world from any other things here. Survival, this addendum in related terms of the agreement shall survive settlement. So what does survive settlement mean? Yeah, so like in your basic agreement of sale, when you have the settlement date, that's over with. This remains into full effect. Like the seller disclosure. Yeah, like seller disclosure, like the pre-settlement walkthrough. Any questions?
Yeah, it's a form that we don't like to use, but there are cases where you'll get into that they do. The other thing that I will caution when we talked about storing things in the garage, make sure that there's no commingling of belongings. In other words, if they're going to store things in the garage, it's only the seller stuff in the garage. Buyer, you don't want the buyer stuff in there, because that really gets hairy when when the seller ends up taking the buyers, or they have a moving company come in and take some of the buyer stuff they shouldn't be taking. So anyway, no commingling.
Also, if this is not. Yeah, correct, time, but until they've got the closed, that's not going to happen. And if anything is on the table and the seller decides, well, no, I'm not opening my doors for you to get your camera bag or your pocketbook or anything else. Just let them know, hey, come back and don't leave anything personal in the house.
Even on the outside, some years ago, I had a transaction where the buyers asked if they could just put some things on the property, some outdoor stuff, just leave it on, I think they wanted to leave it underneath the deck. And so they did, and the seller had already moved out, but they had a moving company come in to move all their belongings out. And of course, the moving company took everything that was there. So get through the walkthrough, and all the buyer stuff is in the moving truck. What was that? Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we had that recently on the dry closing. You know, they closed on Friday, dry closing, money was supposed to transfer on Monday. The buyers were not supposed to have the keys, but they found keys laying on the counter when they did their final walkthrough. So they moved in, they changed the locks, and the seller went back to get their laundry out of the dryer and found the, because it was still their house. And they found out that everything had been changed, they couldn't get in.
Yeah, dry closings, and we all get them once in a while. Dry closings means that no money's transferred, no deed is transferred, and no keys are transferred. If you're representing the buyer and you do the walkthrough, and don't say to the buyer after you finish with the walkthrough, here's the keys.
Yes.
You don't hand the keys over until at settlement table. Yeah, yeah, because you don't want to give those keys up, even if you're representing the buyer, because everything's not signed. You don't know what could go wrong, and so you don't want to give keys out, because you can get into the situation. Now, David was just a mistake on the seller's part, but you might want to remind the sellers, bring all the keys to closing, including the garage door openers. And, yeah, the mailbox key. So,
Well, the mailbox key could be a different thing, because especially if it's in a community,
yeah,
because the post office actually owns the mailbox. You might have like your Billy Bass mailbox, whatever, and you bought that, but the post office owns the space inside that mailbox. So any keys should go through the post office.
To put set date on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. I don't like Monday closings, and I really hate Friday closings. because you hit a hiccup, and you just need a little bit more time. If it's a Friday, you're being put back 3 days versus a Thursday where things can happen, if the money hasn't hit, it'll hit. Then they're just waiting 24 hours, so if you have control over that, I would try to do a closing, really Wednesday or Thursday or Tuesday.
Title companies will love you too for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And not on the very last day.
and that's the last day of the month.
Very good.
Or in a leap year, February 29th.
Okay, any other questions? You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. All right, David.
Yeah, I can get 'em.
Look at those shoes.
I know, I love them. I love them. I get a buyer to close tomorrow, right? So working with Maria, they wanted to change lenders.
Oh,
know,
yeah, I was
last-
gonna ask you about that one.
Yeah, well, they said, okay. I even talked to the other lender.
Did you?
Yeah,